Oh, the question was, what are some of the pathologies we expect to see or hypothesize would happen in the absence of total absence of radiation? There's still going to be metabolism going on, right? So they're going to be breathing oxygen, these cells we have down there, and they're going to be creating free radicals. But we're taking away the natural background radiation, which is an additional stimulus. It's something very fascinating we're learning right now. And some of the things we measure is, how long does it take a cell to divide? First of all, how long does it take, for human cells, it takes roughly 24 hours for a cell to go through one cycle. So it can double every 24 hours. Some yeast cells every 2 hours. But we can measure how long it takes them to double. And in the absence of radiation, they slow down. They can't grow as fast. The second thing is we can look at DNA repair. And we ask, how well are they repairing? And in the absence of radiation, they don't repair very well. And the third thing we ask is, how many cells are turning into cancer cells in our, I'll call it a test tube, to make it simple. How many cells are going to turn into cancer? Well, up on the surface, let's say, for example, we would have 10 cells per 10,000 over 6 weeks turn into cancer cells, just naturally in this system we have. Down there, we get more like 10 or 20. So in the absence of radiation, more cells are transforming. So we believe it's a mechanism that the natural background radiation is doing, is turning on processes very similar to exercise that helps get rid of some of those precancerous cells. So we have lots of endpoints we're seeing negative effects on down there. And we're looking forward to publishing that. We have funding from the Canadian Space Agency to look at the lack of cosmic radiation. We have funding from the NSERC, the National Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council, to study this. Because this mechanism, it's the only place in the world we can do this. I mean, this lab was built to detect neutrinos, so they had to get rid of all cosmic radiation. You can't detect neutrinos on the surface because there's too much radiation around. 2 kilometers underground. I send my students 2 kilometers underground. Then they got to walk 2 kilometers through a mine drift. Walk into this super clean lab that has rooms this size. They're all sterilized. They got to strip down naked, shower, put on hairnets, sterilized clothes. No dust allowed because dust carries that radioactive stuff. And then they go into this lab. Getting students that dedicated, and there's no pubs down there, and there's no coffee breaks, right? So they go down and do that, but that lab was designed to detect neutrinos. And Art McDonald, who I happen to know and was a friend of my wife's family, he won the Nobel Prize in Physics for that, right? 2015, for figuring out there's 3 types of neutrinos coming from the sun. He figured that out because he could figure out the type he called the flavor of the third neutrino. What amazes me with these astrophysicists is they're down there, they're trying to detect dark matter. Some of the biologists go, there's a thing inside this room. It's so complicated I can't even describe it. I go, what are you trying to detect? And they go, we're trying to detect dark matter. I say, well, I thought we didn't know what dark matter was. They say, yeah, we don't know what it is. But I say, well, how can you build a detector for something you don't know what it is? But anyways, I can go on. But the cool thing I learned was the sun that's out there right now, the light you see in your eyes, was created by fusion 1 million years ago in the core of the sun. 1 million years ago. It takes, because it's 700,000 kilometer core, very dense stuff, it takes that long for that light to get out of the core of the sun, and then literally minutes to get to us once it escapes the sun. But the neutrinos, because of their mass, escape immediately. So the neutrinos we're measuring right now today is telling us what the light from the sun is going to be like 1 million years from now. Isn't that cool? I don't know why I became a biologist. And the other thing I want to talk about is opinions. Like, we may or may not change your opinion today. And everyone's entitled to their own opinion. We say, you're entitled to your own opinion, but not your own facts. So your opinion may or may not change. But there's a problem with an opinion. There's also attitude. So if you talk to people about nuclear, and I've been doing it for years, there's opinions versus attitudes. Opinions can change with knowledge. Very difficult to change attitude. Because attitude is a behavioral thing. And when you have an attitude about something, no matter what someone says, you're not going to change it, right? So I should have went in psychology, because instead of biology. So attitudes versus opinions.
I was in a couple of years of chemistry, but I'm trying to understand when these materials, about how they move. You talk about the worst case scenario when it's down, sealed, but does the material, say the material was sitting in one of those, up on the surface, unattended, maybe a stream going by, how does it move? Does it dissolve? Does it oxidize? move the molecule from one place to another. Just, I'm not sure how that happens.
I'm going to pass it to Doug in just a second, but
I don't know.
no, there is a very, very, very interesting natural experiment we have about that. What's the name of the natural reactor?
Oklo.
Yeah, in Oklo, there was a deposit of uranium that was very rich, naturally occurring, and
Yeah, it was,
hundreds of millions of years ago, 2 billion years ago.
it's 2 billion years ago, and it was 3%.
So I should just pass the mic over, but I just love talking about this so much. So it's 2 billion years old. There was a whole bunch of uranium that was quite pure, that was stuck together. And again, uranium, especially the 235, has a very long half-life, but you can imagine billions of years ago, there was a lot more of that 235 compared to 238. And the 235 is the stuff that's fissile, that will split. And in just that right spot where the water was concentrating it created a natural nuclear fission reaction. And they go on for tens of thousands of years, and they created waste, and they created long-lived waste products. And so scientists have been able to look, well, how far did those waste products go in that geology, right? And it was moved by water, precisely what you're saying. Essentially, it was moved by water. Yeah. And basically, maybe you know the exact distance, but it's tens of meters.
Yeah.
So
In unshielded.
yeah, and that's totally unshielded. And then the other example we have, Doug was talking about, is the uranium deposits that are being mined in northern Saskatchewan, which are in a sandstone type rock. Like we talked about that fluid conductance and how the rock under our feet here, the Coburg Formation, it allows water to move a meter in a million years. Sandstone water moves very quickly through, but it's got a clay cap on it, which again is part of the engineered barriers of the deep geologic repository. And that stuff, is at this insanely high concentration. He's saying 20. This is 1%. That's 20%, and that stuff has stayed put for millions and millions of years. And there was something that came to my mind. I've lost it, but
It'll come back.
yeah. No. So one thing I wanted to say, because I think in regards to nuclear waste, and we need to keep it safe for a while, and I think Doug was helping shine some light on what a while means and how dangerous it is over that time period, 200 years, 500 years, etc. Is people say, listen, how many human societies or civilizations have endured that long? 500 years, 1,000 years? Not many, And what we're doing, or I shouldn't say we, because again, I'm not part of this, but what's being planned in terms of putting it in the rock is changing it from a civilizational timescale to a geological timescale. So I think it's very, that's a very worthy skepticism to have, is to say, well, has there any society that's endured that long? Well, that's what we're doing kind of with it on the surface right now. We put it into the geology, we put it in this kind of time machine where we're dealing with geologic events which are, move at that pace of, a meter in a million years.
Yeah, so I was going to comment on this, about this radioactivity in this rock. It's got a very long half-life. Uranium has a very long half-life. 4.5 billion years for uranium to disappear. Half of it disappears. So half-life means what you have today. How long does it take for half of it to disappear? Well, the medical isotopes we use to treat cancers and things like that disappear very fast. If you ever got a PET scan uses what we call fluorine-18. It's got a half-life of 2 hours. So 2 hours after you make a batch of that stuff, half it's gone. And then 2 hours after that, another half's gone. So you're down to a quarter. So you don't have a lot of time once you make PET or FDG F18 to do a PET scan. You have a lot of time because it's decaying very fast. And that's a short half-life. Uranium, on the other hand, has a very long half-life. And that's what's going to be left in these bundles. The half-life will be very long after about 200 or 300 years. And that's why it doesn't give off much radiation, because the half-life is so long. We figured out how old the Earth was because of the half-life of uranium. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old. When this uranium was formed in this Earth, there was 2% in it. Now it's 1%. And guess what? 4.5 billion years from now, it's going to be down to 0.5%. So it takes a long time for this stuff to change. Short half-life, lots of activity, we can use it for certain things. Long half-life, very safe, not very damaging. Yep.
Then make another question that is, so if 500 years from now, all that hot radiation is,
Yeah.
would it have any value?
Well, here's the other point I was going to make. Well, remember half the 235 is in this bundle when we store it, right?
Right.
Do you think we may come up with another use for 235? Very likely. In this bundle, there's also, when you split atoms, you don't split them in half. You split 235 into a range of sizes, different pieces. I use an example of splitting eggs. I usually show a picture of me splitting eggs. Take a dozen eggs and split them in half. You can't split them in half. The big ones, you get little ones. And each one of these pieces that you get is a different element. And in this bundle, there's all sorts of elements. Rare earth metals that we're running out of. There's an isotope in here called actinium-225. The only place you can get it is from fission and used fuel. Actinium-225 is a potent anti-cancer agent that we attach to antibodies to attack cancer. It's in the fuel bundles. You can get them out of there. I heard a presentation by a physicist at U of T that suggests at the time when he did it that the spent fuel bundles we have just in Canada is over $2 trillion worth of valuable metals in here. So the question of getting rid of it permanently is a tough one, because how do we know my kids' kids or their kids' kids won't come up with a brilliant way of using these things that are in this bundle? We can get rid of these things. We can get rid of radioactivity permanently. One solution is to take these bundles and slip them in a tectonic plate where there's a fissure, and it'll go to the core of the earth and melt into nothing and be gone. Do we want to get rid of all of it permanently? That's one thing. The other thing is, we're worried about radioactivity, right? You have these radioactive things we're talking about in the fuel bundles. Well, the guy that won the Nobel Prize in Physics this year has worked out with super high pulse lasers the way to make radioactive things not radioactive. Can you imagine that? We have no more problems with radioactive waste. We're not quite there yet, but he has technology that we need to develop to get rid of radioactivity, if we want. So jumping the gun and getting rid of this stuff permanently, or sticking it somewhere we can never get at it, might be a bit ambitious for our generations. That's my opinion anyways. Not my attitude, that's my opinion.
How about someone from this side of the room? I'm going to put you on the spot.
That's the side that half the died.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I've heard the rock in northern Ontario is quite different from what is presently here. And then also someone else said, I'm just new to the area, so they said that mining is almost non-existent in northern Ontario. Why not have the DGR, I'm saying it right, exist there?
Yeah, I mean, totally valid questions, and I'm going to admit that it's not an area that I have enough expertise in. Certainly, I mean, there's a lot of mining that happens in Northern Ontario, and the Ring of Fire is looking to be a big hotbed of economic activity. Lots of opinions on that. It is a different rock type. I don't have the data on the fluid conductance, but from what I hear, it's also very good rock. I mean, apparently the South Bruce Coburg Formation is the envy of the world. The Finnish, the Finns are building a repository in that granite rock, but over in Scandinavia. And from what I've heard, they're kind of jealous of the limestone, the qualities of the limestone here. But again,
what the boreholes have given you the information.
Yeah, and again, not myself, but the geologists. Right, so I don't want to wade too far into this because I want to acknowledge that it's not my area. Like I'm quite a nerd, as you guys can tell. I love medicine, and then. I mean, just listen to this guy speak. This for me is like this is better than Netflix, better than going to the movies. I'd line up for a Star Wars, movie. It wouldn't line up as long. Anyway.
I think you're gonna get life.
I do.
Yeah. So the question about the Northern Ontario thing. I mean, when this all started, there were many host communities that were willing to learn and listen, right? And Elliott Lake, where I came from, was one of those host communities. After the geology was done and a bunch of other considerations, and you'd mentioned Saugeen and Ojibwe Nation to begin with. Remember, this is treaty land, and the lands basically we're renting it from the people that own the land, the First Nations, and they had a lot to say in the one in Elliott Lake. And so rather than, and it has to be a willing community, because the financial benefits, not just the fact that we're storing this stuff so when we need it, we can use it again. The spin-off that's going to happen for the host community is going to be incredible, because the science that's going to go along with it, the medicine, the isotopes, the imaging, all that stuff's going to be part of this big process. And I think that's where I get really passionate about it, because I do want clean air for my kids. And I have 2 nuclear engineers in our family who work at Bruce Power. and they have kids here in Port Elgin, and this is going to be a big thing. And we're not slowing down with nuclear. If you look at what's going on now with the new technologies we're developing, you can run a whole city with a small modular reactor the size of a refrigerator that you can move around if you have to. And so we're going to have lots of technology that's going to be coming down the pipe, and I think that's an important thing to remember too. But when it comes to where things go, there's a lot of social reasons why things don't happen, not just scientific or biological reasons, right? It's like there's a lot of, and you look at the signs when you're driving in here, I kind of like some of them, they're kind of cute, but there's people have their opinions, and there's lots of other reasons why you wouldn't have one.
Yeah, just to echo my kind of closing statement, I think, again, being a country boy from Aramosa County, there's reasons to oppose this project. Again, I would, the signs that you see have the radiation symbol on them. To me, again, if I lived here, with the understanding that I have, with the study that I've done and the education that I have, it's not the radiation that would be of concern to me, it's all those other factors. And people use kind of NIMBY as an insult. There's a natural impulse. You love the place you live, you love the way it is. We have a tendency to just want to keep things the way they are. That's a natural human impulse that I would share as well, I think, if it was planned in, the farm behind my house. And it would be a decision where it would be, well, what are the benefits to the community and what are the risks? I'm not from here, I'm not going to advance an opinion on that. But I think that's sort of part of the purpose of the talk, is to demystify the radiation side, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. And hopefully, we've shined a bit of a light on that. Again, be skeptical. But we should be skeptical of all information we're getting, and I'm quite humble, and again, I got to get a life. But Dr. Boreham here is quite the encyclopedia, and this is his life of studying this stuff. So anyway, we have
Another question.
Yeah, we got about 12 more minutes.
In comparison, I grew up on a farm, and so did my husband, and my father-in-law actually has farmer's pot. In comparison, even with the cleaning products that we use, what is the risk comparison to having it in the ground versus even our everyday chemicals that we use, and same with farming?
Yeah, so I was a farmer.
Want to repeat the question?
Oh yeah, the question is, what are the other hazards? I think you're asking, what is the relative risk from the small amount of radiation that someone may or may not ever get compared to all the other stuff we deal with?
Yeah.
My personal opinion and my experience being a farmer is it's way worse being a farmer than working in the nuclear power plant, getting exposed to, I remember when we first started, we were spraying for weeds, my wife and I, and we had full gear on, we were trained in nuclear from Atomic Energy of Canada, so we happened to have all the proper gear, the respirators, the white suits, the gloves. We did everything. We were treating our pesticides and herbicides like radioactivity, and it freaked our neighbors out. They came over one day and said, "What the heck are you spraying? Seriously, you're gonna kill us all." I said, "No, I'm just spraying Roundup like everyone else." "Well, why are you dressed up?" "I spray my dog down with it to get rid of dandruff and stuff." It's no, it's bad for you. These chemicals and toxins, and I was spraying with a black type of spray for a rot on the grapes, and it gets everywhere, everywhere. It's everywhere. It's in your face. Even though we're all protected, you can see it. So of course my neighbor says, "You should spray with Nova. It doesn't get everywhere because it's white, you can't see it." I said, "It gets everywhere. You just can't see it." So people get very passive in the farming business, right? And you always want to cut a corner to speed things up, because farming to me is how would I say it? It's almost like being a university professor. There's never a time when you have nothing to do, right? In fact, you're firefighting the whole time. What am I going to do today to prevent tomorrow? And then sometimes corners get cut, safety gets missed, and if you probably look at the statistics on farming in terms of diseases and respiratory problems, it's going to be very high compared to people the bottom line is people that work in the nuclear industry are the healthiest people when it comes to longevity and health. There's lots of reasons for that. I like to say, well, maybe a little bit of radiation is good for you, but it's probably because they have great lifestyles, good health, good nutrition, it's just a lifestyle that allows you to thrive and prosper and be healthy. You can come home and go cycling and walking. You don't have to, I would be out disking my fields at 3 in the morning because I ran out of time during the day and I got to go to work in the morning. So I was basically a part-time university professor, full-time farmer. I wouldn't admit that to the dean, but that's the reality.
Yeah, go ahead.
You spoke about the effects of radiation from the fuel bundle, and you gave a timeline. Can you please just review that timeline again, the effects of the radiation immediately when the bundle comes out of the reactor versus, I think you went on to 500 years.
I'm gonna pass that back to Doug.
Yes, so I usually have a nice graph that I show. It's on the computer, but if you can imagine, it's called exponential decay. So just imagine this is a graph, and this is time in years to go to 1,000,000 years. And this is when the bundle comes out at time 0, 54,000 sieverts of gray an hour. And it goes down like this. And after about 10 years, 99% of that's gone. So you're down to about 200 or 300 sieverts per hour. And it goes down like this. And remember, this is the bottom line of what time is. And it goes like this and curves off. In about 200 years, you got about 37 milligray an hour. That's 1/1000th of the 37,000. And then it goes like this, up to 1,000,000 years. It never really changes after 200 to 500 years because it's all gone basically. It's that long-lived stuff that hangs around, and, like this uranium rock, 4.5 billion years. It'll give off radiation for another 4.5 billion years. Yep.
And refresh my memory, please. At what level would you say it's minimal risk if you were directly in front of that fuel bundle?
Well, again, it's about time and distance and shielding. But let's just say this fuel bundle is 200 years old, and I'm standing this far away from it. If I stood here for an hour, I would get roughly what a CT scan would give off in 2 seconds. So an hour, it took me an hour to get about a whole body CT scan with the radiation. So I have this crazy idea that everyone's going to have a fuel bundle 200 years from now when we're living, when we find out that the absence of radiation is bad and the presence is good, so everyone needs to have one of these under their bed. And give yourself, I shouldn't have said that, but...
Sure, go ahead in the front row.
I have a question. Say, just now you say there are different objects like and banana and all have radiation. So my question is human whether human has got any radiation?
Yeah. If you sleep,
Could you repeat the question?
the question is, are humans radioactive? And the answer is yes, because we eat and breathe radioactivity. If you sleep with someone every night, basically, if you're lucky enough to sleep with someone every night, every year you basically give them the equivalent of a chest x-ray with a radiation, and they give it back to you, so it's a fair deal. Yeah, so roughly right now, I said you're giving off about 7,000 decays, all radiation taken into account, 7,000 decays per second in your body every second of the day, as long as you're breathing, right? And we eat radioactive stuff like carbon. Carbon has a radioactive form called carbon-14. Carbon-12 is stable, carbon-14 is radioactive. We eat stuff with carbon in it. So we're eating radioactive carbon, carbon-14. And if you stop eating, i.e. you die, the carbon-14 disappears in your body or in your bones, but the carbon-12 stays the same. So the ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-14 changes. It's here, and then carbon-14 disappears with time. And if you find some bones from somebody or some tissues, you can say, well, how long has this person been dead for by comparing the ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-14. That's called carbon dating. So we have lots of ways of using the radiation in your body to do time studies and things like that. But essentially, we are radioactive as long as we're eating radioactive stuff. A banana, if you make a banana smoothie, it'll give off about 200 decays per second in the banana smoothie. A veggie smoothie will be about 200 or 300 decays per second because of carbon-14 in it. But we're eating and drinking it and breathing it. So
Does it vary with the age? Suppose there is a tree has got different radiations and another has got different radiation, something like that?
say again, sorry?
Is it varying with the age? I mean, so does the kids have got the radiation?
Yep.
A small kid
Yeah.
has got any radiation on that?
Does a small child have radiation compared to an adult?
More or less radioactive than younger.
Well, it has to do with size too, right? It's per kilogram. So the bigger you are, the more radioactivity you have in your system. It's a per kilogram, becquerels per kilogram or per liter. So little people are less radioactive than big people. but they are radioactive nonetheless.
So that if somebody's dead, there's no radiation?
Oh no, if someone dies, then what happens is just the carbon-14 decays away. The rest of the, like when you cremate someone, those ashes are radioactive. It all concentrates in the ashes, right? So you can measure all the different isotopes in your body when you get cremated, and you can see what you have. But there's going to be uranium, thorium, radium is pretty well everywhere. So yeah, uranium, thorium, polonium. If you smoke, you get a lot of polonium and lead-210 in your body because for some reason tobacco plants love sucking up radioactive polonium and lead-210 from the soil. It's some kind of bioaccumulation. So if you're smoking, you're going to get somewhere up to 200 millisieverts of radiation a year from the cigarette smoke. But the cigarette smoke is a major carcinogen compared to that radiation you're going to get. So I always use the example, you're going to get 200 millisieverts worth of dose a year if you smoke 30 cigarettes a day. But smoking 30 cigarettes a day has other consequences that I wouldn't worry about the radiation. I'll tell you that. Right?
Thank you.
Okay, we have to wrap up. There's some doctors here that are actually going to go on a tour and go and visit the spent fuel pools and the dry casks. So we got to run off for that. I personally would love to be able to hang out a bit more. Maybe we'll come back to Teeswater if there's a popular demand. But anyway, it's been a real pleasure seeing all your faces, interacting with some of you. And again, I wish we could stick around to shake some hands and get to know people a bit better, but we got to kind of zip off to this tour.
Thanks for coming. Yeah, appreciate it.